This is the display case dedicated to the Stratton brothers. These are the masks that they wore. That provided a clue to the investigating officer that they might be local. Why else would they want to be disguised? Here is the shop where the raid and the murders took place. Here is a very disturbing photograph of poor Mr. Farrow, one of the two people murdered that day. He made it as far as his parlour where he was bludgeoned to death. Alfred Stratton left a bloody thumbprint inside this cash box from which the money was removed, and there is the thumbprint blown up. Here, in about half a dozen images, is told the story of a murder that gripped Britain in 1910. Dr. Crippen was married to Cora, but she disappeared and officers began to investigate, and they discovered a shovel which Crippen used to use, and apparently he had dug a grave in his cellar for bits and pieces of his wife. When are fingerprints first used in anything that has anything to do with crime?
Really, the first time they're used by British people is in India, when in the late 1870s a magistrate decides that one way of stopping people making fraudulent claims for grandfather's pension is to take fingerprints rather than have signatures, because people had been turning up and saying, I want granddad's pension, when granddad was already dead. And then after a few years, it occurred to Sir William Herschel, the magistrate, that he could actually use this for preventing fraud by threatening fraudsters that they were going to have to use their fingerprints rather than sign things, because signatures were easy to forge. So that's really the first time that the British begin using fingerprints in this way.
If some of the pioneering work on fingerprinting was done in India, what brings the Metropolitan Police into the picture?
Another Far Eastern connection. A Scottish missionary and doctor working in Tokyo thinks that fingerprints can be used for solving crimes. When he comes back from Tokyo, he writes to the Metropolitan Police. He also writes to Charles Darwin, the Origins of the Species Charles Darwin, who at the time says, well, I'm rather too old for going in for this kind of thing. And he passed the letter on to his cousin, Francis Galton, the eugenicist scientist. And together, Galton and Faulds tried to develop a system of fingerprinting for Scotland Yard, but it's a bit too sophisticated, although Faulds continues as an advocate of fingerprints but appears as a defence witness in the Stratton case.
In the 1960s, London was hip, synonymous with art and fashion, and above all, music. And this, Carnaby Street, was its epicentre. And the generation that gathered here was young and rebellious and experimental, and part of the permissive society, which for some represented a threat to traditional British values. How would you describe, looking back on it, that glamorous era of the 1960s?
It was a wonderful time if you were a pop musician. If you're a member of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, the world really seemed to belong to you. A member of the Stones or the Beatles could come along here, Carnaby Street, go into any shop and order 12 pairs of boots and 20 suits and not have to pay for them. They were that much pampered and adulated, but it did create a great deal of resentment, not least among the police. The police really hated this idea that these sort of young men could do anything they wanted to do, and in particular that they seemed to be taking drugs.
Was there a kind of generational struggle going on? I mean, was there a feeling that there was an old establishment that needed at least to be woken up, if not to be turned over?
Initially, the establishment was very indulgent. They were amused. And of course, the Beatles and the Stones too were doing an awful lot for British industry. It was the only successful British industry of the early 1960s. But gradually there came a feeling that something had to be done. And it was focused on the Rolling Stones.
With the dramatic assault across these balconies, Britain gained an overnight reputation for zero tolerance of terrorism. The Iranians, of course, were pleased that the siege had been lifted, but they also had reason for complaint. Just before the siege began, they had written to Britain's Diplomatic Protection Group, warning that they needed extra security, saying in their letter that forces hostile to Iran are planning acts of sabotage.
The problem is when the Iranian diplomats go back to Iran and they kind of bring to light the fact that they've made warnings about the security of the embassy in London, then the government starts getting involved with this conspiracy theory whereby the British government had actually colluded with the hostage takers. They think, well, hang on, these guys, the hostage takers, were backed by Iraq. Now we believe that the Brits are backing Iraq, and certainly then when Iraq invades shortly after, there is this sense that actually this has been one big conspiracy and the Brits have been kind of behind this as a way of weakening Iran as a prelude to invasion.
Do you think there was any significance to the fact that Chief Superintendent Bromley of the Diplomatic Protection Group claimed he didn't know about the approach?
I don't think it's possible to discern that wider significance because the letter was sent 5 days before the embassy was seized, and it could be that it just didn't arrive on his inbox or that he forgot about it. So I don't think there's any evidence of a conspiracy. There had been a number of recommendations made to improving the security of the Iranian embassy. Bulletproof glass was put in, but then certain other recommendations were not. This was an era when embassy security was not what it is now, and therefore I don't think there's any kind of sense that the Brits were to blame for this.
How do you feel about things like that incident in Rendlesham Forest in 1980 when it was thought that a UFO had come down to Earth? How do you feel about that?
Well, of course, it would be incredibly exciting if it was a spaceship. But all the UFOs, when you look closely, turn out not to be true. These reports seem to tell us more about the psychology of people than the existence of ET.
What are the chances that there is intelligent life out there?
We don't know. The trouble is, we don't know how life starts. So we don't know if it's an incredibly common, every time you have a planet like the Earth, life emerges, or it might be incredibly rare, such that in the whole of the universe, a billion stars, it might just have occurred once. We might be it. We might be alone. There's no evidence either way.
If tomorrow you got news that we had received a signal from extraterrestrials, what would it mean for us on Earth?
But obviously it would be the most important event that ever happened in civilization, because they're probably much more advanced than us. So if they're nice and friendly, they will tell us everything we do. Everything would change.
The people who work here are in the business of explaining phenomena. And if extraterrestrials really are in the habit of visiting planet Earth, you'd think that these people would see them coming. So what do you use this instrument for, Steve?
So we use this with our undergraduate students to look at a variety of objects in the night sky, which might include stars, planets and comets.
It will now seek the target.
Exactly.
What am I looking for? Oh!
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Steve, what's been your most exciting day in the observatory?
Well, in fact, it was about this time last year I was working with a group of undergraduate students on one of these telescopes in these domes, and we observed a particular galaxy which is known as the Cigar Galaxy. It's a very beautiful photogenic object, actually. Here's an image of it taken in colour in 2013, and you can see the gas and dust in the galaxy itself. And these are stars within our own galaxy. Now follow this pattern here, 1, 2, 3, over to here, and you'll see there's a new object in this image. And this is the picture we took on that night in January 2014. And this new object, it turns out, after a rather frantic evening's activity to get confirmation, turns out it's what we call a thermonuclear supernova, which is one of the most, it's an exploding star. It's a star that's reached the end of its lifetime and exploded, which has dumped light 5 billion times the amount of energy the sun puts out. It's so bright, and this object is 12 million light years away. So we're seeing light that is 12 million years old, and this light arrived here in January 2014. This becomes really fascinating then for us as astronomers, because now we know there are planets, we know there are billions of planets in our own galaxy in orbit around stars other than the sun. And those planets are in what we call the Goldilocks zones. They may have atmospheres, they may have some form of life on them, whether it's some bacteria or vegetation or something.
Originally known as Millwall Rovers, this was a working man's club founded in J.T. Morton's preserve and canning factory in 1885 in the docks of East London. Indeed, before being known as the Lions, their nickname was the Dockers, because the men who unloaded the ships were admitted to games free, a heritage which is still recalled in the club's stands. Oh, excuse me, sir. Hello. Going to the football today, I just wonder, wouldn't you prefer to go to an archery tournament?
No, definitely not.
No?
Definitely football, yeah.
Don't you think archery's got something to it, you know?
Never done it, to be honest, so can't really say for sure, but...
Quite a manly sport, would you say, archery?
Possibly, yeah, but football's my sport.
Okay.
Without shadows down.
Enjoy the match.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, would you not prefer to go to an archery tournament?
I am an archer.
You're an archer? Are you really?
Yeah.
You're good at it?
Well, I was, my mates are doing it.
What do you think about the fact that a king of England tried to ban the beautiful game? What do you think of that?
Shame on him. Yes.
You can't think of any reason for banning football.
No, what would you ban football?
Would you not prefer to go to an archery tournament?
No.
No?
No, not particularly.
I think football sport is vilified nowadays. I'm not surprised that they stop people playing it then.
Now, don't you think archery, don't you think that's a real man's sport?
Yes, but it was a weapon, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a weapon to go to war with.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that's why the French cut the fingers off. When they caught them at Agincourt, they cut their two fingers off.
Horrible.
That's why they go like that, and I want...
Is that why?
That's why they go like that instead of what we do.
Oh, come on, ladies. Yeah. Imagine now. Imagine for a moment the rippling biceps.
Well,
don't you think?
I wouldn't go every Saturday. I wouldn't watch it weekly.
No, you wouldn't be a season ticket holder.
No.
Despite his dislocated limbs, there was enough life left in Guy Fawkes for a public execution. He was dragged from the Tower of London and through the streets of the capital to a place where, as the law prescribed, he would be first hanged and then disemboweled. and the site of his execution was to be the very place that he tried to blow up, the Palace of Westminster. How quickly does it become a matter of official celebration that the plot has been broken?
Very quickly. I mean, the first bonfires recorded to sort of celebrate the breaking of the plot are the following day, the 5th of November. The sense of rejoicing, I think, is utterly genuine. I think as soon as people wake up to what the plot would have achieved, the scope of it, the scale of it, the idea that it would have taken out the entire English state, and moreover the nascent British state. At this moment we're looking at the sort of formation of Britain. So the option that the state would have been destroyed in one blow, or you have continuity, stability, I think that would have been a huge relief to everybody. So I think that the celebrations are genuine.
So as the anniversary of November the 5th is marked in subsequent years, is there a very strongly anti-Catholic element to those celebrations?
Yes, the anti-Catholic threat remains in England for a very long time. I mean, the reason we remember it is in large part Act of Parliament. There's an Act of Parliament very soon after the plot that calls for an annual day of Thanksgiving. So specifically we're talking sermons and prayers, very much preaching the new Protestant faith and very much rejecting any form of Catholicism. And when it starts morphing into a sort of more sort of celebratory thing with bonfires and fireworks, it's the Pope's effigy that's stuck up there. I suppose as soon as Guy Fawkes fades from bonfire night, and I think he virtually has, it frees him up to be used in other ways. We used his name very freely very soon after the plot. The word Guy entered the English language very soon after the plot was discovered. Initially in the sort of context of a sort of pejorative, a bad guy. And then with time and distance, once it sort of shifted over to America, we had this notion now of guy being everybody. We're all guys.
Do we have any way of comprehending how important slavery and the slave trade was to the British economy in those days?
Well, it was immensely important, and it grew more important as the 18th century went on. There were many, many millions of pounds, and that's millions of pounds in 18th century money, not in modern money, that were invested in it, and many profits that were made in it. There were enormous profits to be made for people trading in sugar, in tobacco, in cotton, in all the slave-produced goods. And of course, the people who were themselves slave traders were making vast profits out of trafficking people from Africa across to the Caribbean and America. And a lot of that money came here to the City of London and was invested in all kinds of businesses, many of which are still with us to this day. Well, think of some of the names that are associated with sugar, think of some of the names that are associated with banking and insurance, and I don't like to name names.
I'm in Kensington in London on my way to the College of Psychic Studies. But then you probably foresaw that.
Hello.
Leslie.
Welcome to the College of Psychic Studies.
Thank you very much.
This is
indeed.
Arthur Conan Doyle, who was our first president after we moved here in 1925. The people on the walls here are a mixture of mediums and investigators. And this is the lecture hall. This is D.D. Hume. He has the distinction not only of being a famous physical medium who used to levitate and is said to have floated out of a window on one occasion not far from Victoria Station and back again. He's also the most painted medium.
Maybe see the bit of the building that's most associated with Helen Duncan.
Indeed, but we're going to have to go up further.
Okay.
Well, here we are on the 4th floor. We're going into the meditation. This is very peaceful day. It was very different in the 1920s because experiments took place with mediums who came from different parts of the world, which for the time were quite advanced scientifically.
And when Helen Duncan was here, what was she put through?
Well, she was placed in a sack, and she was also tied up as well, which of course was meant to prevent any movement. And the people who were observing her included quite distinguished scientists and very experienced investigators. She took part in some seances, but unfortunately they produced a very negative report arguing that she was regurgitating the ectoplasm that she was producing.
And so there was nothing supernatural about that. She was ingesting something and then bringing it up again. That was his conclusion.
That was his conclusion. It's not found general acceptance among other researchers, even those who have inclined to think that Helen Duncan wasn't genuine, and they have considered other possibilities, that there could have been, for example, a sitter who passed her something during the course of the sitting. But certainly the sittings here were fairly well controlled for their time, and it's difficult to give this as the explanation for all the things that took place, certainly when she was being tested by our organisation.